So Windows 10 is coming to an end and your budget PC may not be able to upgrade to Windows 11. What do you do? Well, you can try out Bazzite, and that's what I did. So I've tried it for almost a month, not quite. I'm fairly familiar with Linux, so I went through kind of a rigorous testing and daily use of it. And here's what I found with using Bazzite as my main PC for almost a month. The best way to think of Bazzite is like a console PC hybrid. If you're accustomed to Linux, you might find Bazzite a little restrictive because it's almost like having training wheels on your operating system. Much like a console, you need to wait for the devs to push an update for your drivers. The best example of this would be your GPU, such as Battlefield 6 needing GPU drivers on launch day. You would need to wait for the devs to test and push the driver. Then you would be able to get it when Bazzite itself would upload. So you would have to wait all that time. That's what Immutable feels like, and that's why I want to compare it to a console. Now, playing Battlefield 6 on Linux in general is a whole different issue due to anti-cheat and all that. So we're not going to get into that here. This is specifically about Bazzite. But if you're playing games from a budget bin, you're probably not worried about 0-day patches and $90 video games. You're just worried about rent. The thing about Bazzite is it prevents you from pushing the buttons that might break your system. Kind of like the old Windows days where you could delete the entire drive, and that included Windows on the drive. So on Linux, you can still technically do that. You can push buttons that will break the machine. And that's part of something that Linux users don't like, that restraint. They want to push that button because, for first, they may know what that button does and they know they're willing to take the risks, and it might be something that they do have to do in order to make it work, like something else that they've got going. So they've already got things lined up, but as a fresh Windows user, you may not know what to not push, and you're going to push the button because it looks like you should push the button, and then next thing you know, nothing works. And that's where Bazzite is good, because to a degree it prevents you from pushing those buttons or installing the wrong software, things like that. So it's really good for beginners on first learning how to use Linux and just making it work. Like, for example, 4 years ago, as a new Linux user myself, freshly moving over from Windows, I installed a patch, forced it through, followed the instructions I found, which was for a different distro, so don't do that, and totally broke my operating system where I had to reinstall it. So I lost anything that I had been doing on it and any work, and it felt like a huge setback at the time, but that was just the experience of learning. I proceeded to break my operating system several more times through the command line until I learned my lessons there. These are some of the reasons why I want to compare it to kind of like a console PC hybrid, because there's a lot of convenient things that you can do. I mean, you can go off and program, write, browse the internet, or even make games with Godot or renpy. You can use Blender, Krita, and Inkscape. It's way more useful than a console. These training wheels also come in the form of the Bazaar. Now, the Bazaar is where you can get programs that will work with Bazzite and make installing easier than even Windows. So you can go search the Bazaar and find programs you like or need, such as Visual Studio Code or other programs that you might want. Of course, it's not all good sides. There are downsides to it, and that's some of the things that you have to be prepared for with Linux. And a lot of these are actually common amongst all of the distros. So you usually have to kind of put a little bit of manual effort into tweaking and adjusting to make things just work for what it is, or you need to go out and find what's called dependencies to make certain things work properly. On Windows, many things just work, but with Linux, you have to think of it as if you're custom building your own personal operating system tailored for you and your hardware. But of the 11 different distros I've used in the past, this was the fastest and easiest one to just step into and get most of my setup working, which was a pleasant surprise. That includes printers, scanners, mic, using different software like Blender, Krita, Inkscape, and even game engines. Game engines were actually quite easy to get going and working inside. And of course, games, Steam, OS, Epic, Roblox, things like that. But one thing to keep in mind is what works for you and your hardware may not work for the next person. For example, I had an HP printer 1102 that would work on Ubuntu. I'd just plug it in and away it would go, but not on Bazzite. After an hour, I could not make it print. And because I was testing this from the eyes of a new user, I said, okay, this is probably the maximum patience somebody would have trying to make a printer work. So I went and tested another printer of mine, an HP M28. I plugged that in and away it went. It just printed. First test page, there was no resistance. The funny thing about that is, when I use it on Windows, HP has disabled certain features on it that I can't use it. So I've actually almost scrapped that printer because I don't have HP's subscription. And here, the scanner worked. I was able to use third-party ink with it. So that's the odd thing about it. Now, if you told me your M28 didn't work on Bazzite, I wouldn't be surprised either, because that's just how Linux can be. I also tried some itch games, installed them with minimal effort, and of course, browser was no issue. To my surprise, it was actually my own game that gave the issues, RPG Quickie. If you can believe, it's not even a video game, it's a tabletop RPG on a PDF. So RPG Quickie is a free rules light RPG pen and paper game that I designed with a friend. In LibreOffice, the font is wrong, the headers are gone, and some of the art is out of alignment. So even the columns are adjusted wrong. So keep that in mind if you're planning on doing some editing with Linux, like actual Word program editing, or at least with Office Libre. Also, if you're interested, go check out RPG Quickie. I'll leave the link in the description below. Another hiccup I had was game engines. While there are workarounds to make Unity work, but not with Bazzite, there's different operating systems you need for that. I read Unreal also did the same, but not so much with Game Maker, or it was you were supposed to save often. I don't remember. So these three major game engines wouldn't work without a lot of workarounds. But when I tried Godot and renpy, I had no issues. It was an easy install, it was just straight in, and it worked just as normal. So I also have some videos about those, you can go check them out, and I also got Visual Studio Code up and running with a single click. Now as for my controller and those issues, that was a different story too. I have an 8-bit DOE, which is fairly common and popular on Amazon. Flawless on Battlefield, and of course Windows, it works perfectly fine. But on Bazzite, I had a few games that just acted odd. For example, GTA 5 would disable it for all my other games. Until I went into the game app controller and clicked on a button on the controller. Then Hollow Knight, Celeste, all those other games would work. But if I went back into GTA 5, it wouldn't work, and it would disable it all over again, and I would have to go back into the Windows app or restart the whole machine to make the controller work. So that was just something weird, and it was GTA 5, so you would think controllers are well supported through Steam OS. But keep in mind, 15 years ago, Windows struggled with controller support, and only official Windows controllers as well as 360 controllers would work only on Windows. Like it was temperamental, and you kind of really didn't even do it back then. But now they just work. So that's another thing about Linux. The more people who support it, the more these drivers are going to grow and build. When I added a second SSD for the Steam hardware or for the Steam storage, I would have to go to File Manager, click on the drive, and enter the password every time I restarted the computer, because Steam or other programs couldn't see it unless I did that. This could be as simple as selecting a setting, which I didn't delve very deep into this one. I just kept clicking on it in the File Manager and entering my password. So I only scratched the surface because I didn't want to muddy the waters with my previous 4 years of Linux use, so I was trying to really come at this like that fresh Windows user. Another odd one was workflow on some of the programs I was actually very familiar with, like Inkscape. I went to make a simple round vector art game art just to do some quick prototyping, and all I could do was stare at the screen, look at it, almost like an Android user looking at an iPhone interface and trying to figure out where to go, because I just stared at it and I couldn't make a circle suddenly, and yet I'll make battle axes and uniforms and outfits and everything on the Windows Inkscape, but I just got locked up and frozen staring at the screen on Inkscape, and I don't know what that was all about. But the funny thing is, I switched back over to Windows to finish off this particular video, because it's my main computer is just much better hardware compared to the one I was filming this all on and doing the testing. So when I switched back over and I went to use Blender here to do all the video editing, I stared at that screen going, what is going on? And it took me time to get back into Blender on Windows, but it was just straight in over on Linux. So just keep that in mind too. It's really just getting familiar with the operating system if you're struggling with something. And with Bazzite, it's actually very easy, that I've found. It was very easy to slide into it, and it was really just getting familiarized with it was a lot of my issues. Not to mention it was done on an i7 4770 with an RX 550, so that didn't help. The further I dove into this, I decided to test out certain games, such as Roblox. Roblox, in fact, I made a brand new account. I installed it using what was called Sober, and it was just a very quick sort of thing. I was up and running with a brand new account and playing Roblox games within 5 minutes. I did have some issues with my controller and keyboard, but I've already mentioned that. With the 8-bit DOE, it could be different with a different controller. But when I would plug the controller in, my keyboard would have problems with the ASDW keys, and they wouldn't work, but I can use the mouse, and I can use other keys, and so it was like they wouldn't share. And so then for the hotkeys, I wouldn't be able to click using the specials like A, B, X, and all that, but I can use it for the movement, which was strange with that on Paintball. So I also made my daughter play it. She's accustomed to an i5 with a 1660 Super, and she didn't notice any difference between playing this on Bazzite with Windows 11. She didn't notice any difference between this old PC and using it on her computer. And she was playing things like Rivals, Grow a Garden, and then some game where the deer eats you at night. I don't know what game that is. I guess it's pretty popular with her and her friends. So she tried these 3 games, and I had her kind of help out, give a little bit of a test, because I don't know anything about Roblox. So she told me it worked all perfectly fine, especially after we unplugged that controller, and the keyboard just worked flawlessly after that. SteamOS was another one. You just put your account in, download your games, and away you would go. Bazzite handles all of this for you. It'll get the dependencies. It'll put it in the proper order of Wine and Lutris and other bits and pieces. These are things that can break other operating systems if you do them wrong in trying to install SteamOS. You really need to know how to go get those with the command line in other distros. But here, it's pre-installed. It's working. It keeps getting updated. The devs work on that, and they basically focus on that one. And so I tried a few games. I tried Path of Exile, which is a perfect game, which is free, and it's perfect for people who are on a budget using older hardware like this, because it's fairly simple to run. My issues with it was definitely the RX 550, but I did go through and I tried it out, and I was playing it, and I'd played this years ago, so I was almost unfamiliar with it since, but it was a perfectly fine experience from the amount that I played with it. Now, testing Steam, I even went way back to the 90s. Like, we're talking Capitalism 2. That was in the 90s. I mean, Linux was only like 8 years old at that point, so I was surprised that worked. I enjoyed this game. And the only odd part about it was zoom in was zooming out, or scrolling forward was zoom out, and scrolling back was zooming in. I also couldn't click during the tutorial, but all these were kind of minor because I was able to just skip the tutorial, and the game itself worked perfectly fine. You can do all kinds of stuff in the stock market. You can buy, build, sell. You can create stores. You can make your news media outlets. You can link. You can do everything that you're supposed to in the game. So there was no issues there. I did try SimCity 4, and it didn't work. At least it didn't work properly. It sort of worked, but there was no way I can click on it. And the mouse was way offset from where it should have been. Now, the odd part about that was, a few years ago, I installed it on Mint with Steam, went through the process of setting that all up, and the game worked over there. So I'm not 100% sure of why it didn't work over here. I'm sure it's just a setting. Again, it's one of those little things that you had to tweak, but I wasn't properly able to get it to work on Bazzite over here this time. But I'm sure if I played around with it, I could get it going too. Total War Empire was another surprising one that I tried. Now, this was a favorite. I actually really enjoyed this series before they changed out to Rome 2 and all that sort of stuff and some of the newer stuff. I liked this style of gameplay. I maxed out the settings, and even the RX 550 can handle it. So I tried some of these older games. Now, the i7 4770 was peak CPU almost for this time frame of this game, and it didn't struggle with it at all. The game on Bazzite worked perfectly fine. So again, if you're into these older games like this and you're content with that for your budget build, then you're safe here for something like this. I also went and tried Epic. Using Heroic, I was up and running in under 5 minutes again. It's just really the time of setting up your passwords and everything. You got to do that with all the other distros as well. And Epic is great if you're on a budget because of their free weekly games, which are also hardware friendly. Now, I just tried Doki Doki for some of you visual novel fans, and I had no issues. I was able to go through, click on options and choices, and read through it, auto a bunch of it, scroll through. I could do a bunch of things that there was no effect, and it used very minimal CPU and graphics power, of course. Like visual novels are definitely no issues there. And it all just worked as intended. Another game I also tried on Epic was a game called The Dungeon of Noblek. I think I pronounced that right. I'll put it on the screen. Which, minus the RX 550, worked perfectly fine on Bazzite. I can click on the screen, I can move, I can use the controller, I could do... You know what? Come to think of it, I'm not sure if I had the controller plugged in and tested on that, so I can't verify that. But with the mouse and keyboard, it does work. You can click on it, you can scroll, you can use the escape key, you can do all kinds of stuff, which is problems with some other distros if you do that wrong. That's what I'm talking about. You might not be able to use the escape key if you installed it wrong on a different distro because the escape key is not assigned. This is what I was talking about before, but here on Bazzite, it worked. It was fine with me. I tried out retro gaming and emulators, and gaming was great. For the most part, it was very simple, and the emulators are right inside. You can just go to the bazaar and click on the emulator you want to do, and you just click through its steps and set it up, and away you go. You can be playing your old video games, like from 30 years ago, or from your old consoles, things like that. And if you're interested in RetroArch, for example, I have a little tutorial video set up to just make it easy, streamline, very basics, and get you going type of game. Now, I was also a godot user, and it was very convenient to have the emulators on a desktop environment like this with Bazzite versus like a dedicated emulator machine like godot. I could also monitor my CPU, GPU, and RAM on a second screen throughout the different consoles and different games, and I could see which games and which consoles was GPU heavy, or if it was CPU, or if it was using more RAM. So I could see visually what was being affected by each game, and I can maybe in the future tweak the hardware that I'm like either upgrading to or buying or what I'm doing with it. Now, another thing that I found with a lot of these was indie games, if you're on Steam or even on itch, worked very well with Bazzite. There was a few hiccups here and there, but it's kind of touch and go. And if you're on a budget, you're probably supporting indie games or small studios. You're not buying the big AAA that $90 might take. So what I found with a lot of these smaller games like that was they quite often worked. It was really a question of your budget. My conclusion in this is Bazzite has been a wonderful Linux experience for me. I highly recommend it, especially if you have an AMD GPU or you've only been using Windows until now and you're looking at switching over to a possible Linux distro for your operating system because of October 2025. I'm accustomed to console gaming, so the limited access to some things didn't bother me once I began treating it like a console, and not like another Linux machine such as Kali, Ubuntu, or Manjaro, and so on. And like I said before, what works for one person may not work for you. If you have the latest and greatest hardware with NVIDIA and need 0-day patches for brand new AAA games, you may need a more hands-on distro such as Pop! OS or one of the other distros. I'm not sure about Catchy OS, so I can't say anything about that. Or you simply have to stick with Windows and stay on it there. Some people have mentioned dual booting. That's also another advanced feature which could corrupt both your operating systems and you lose both, which I've done too. I've done that as well. I've had to totally wipe the drive and reinstall both operating systems. So they sometimes don't play nice together. If you have a 20-year-old dual core with DDR2, maybe it's just time to move on. Because Bazzite is good, but it's not a miracle worker. So if you got one of those really old machines like that, If it sounds like I'm harping on Linux, it's not. Or at least that's not my intention, because I have 6 PCs for various tasks, and 5 of them are Linux. So I'm actually a lover of Linux, but at the same time I understand Windows has its place too, because the main machine that I have things on is my Windows machine. Now, if you're really worried about things, you can also put like your banking info on a separate PC and just run that as your business PC, this little office PC that's running Linux. And the only thing you do on there is that. In your Windows PC, who cares if Microsoft knows what video games you play? And it is a little bit less hassle, but that's if you have the budget to keep up with Windows 11 hardware. Now, the trick about Linux is because it's a community-driven operating system, unlike corporate Windows, the more people who use it, the more companies will give it focus on creating drivers and other products, making their software or their products Linux friendly. And that just helps the entire ecosystem. And in the past 4 years, the strides I've seen has been amazing. Like trying to game on Linux 4 years ago when I first started was possible, but not nearly as impossible as it was 10 years ago and even further back. But now, look at what we have. I mean, even if you just look at Bazzite, which is a perfect step into and not worry about, is my game going to work today? You come home from a job you hate, and is it going to work for me today? Maybe, maybe not. Bazzite, you can confidently turn it on day after day, and I was finding that I was using my old i7 Dell OptiPlex for everyday use more than I was using my brand new, well, I shouldn't say brand new, but my new modern 5900X AMD with Windows 11. I even kind of miss it, actually, just going on there and logging on, minus the constant screen timeouts. That was a little bit annoying. Even when you were downloading something, it would shut the whole thing down and it wouldn't keep it open. So I would have canceled downloads or other stuff. If you got something out of this video, give it a thumbs up. Also drop a comment if you were also trying Bazzite or would like to try Bazzite in your old budget PC, or if you have plans on moving ahead after October 2025 when Windows stops their security update. What is your plans? Are you just going to go out there and try and find something that Windows 11 will work on, or is there other operating systems you're looking at? Because again, like I said, this is a perfect one to get junk PCs up and going on, and just maybe toss it under the TV so that when you come home from the job you hate, you can just sit down and play a game. And you don't have to fuss about it and troubleshoot why it's not working. Now, as for me, I'm off to build a PC out of literal garbage. which were discarded parts and pieces, so keep an eye out for that video in the future.